The project I completed is the security camera with cloud storage project. I chose this because it seemed complex enough for me to struggle with, but fun enough that I would learn more about my Raspberry Pi. This project managed to hit all the requirements that I needed to hit, such as being good for my deeper understanding of the Raspberry Pi's architecture, being doable in the allotted time I had, and was fun to document. This project will be useful to me outside of class because I can implement this into my real life, such as using a real security system. With my Raspberry Pi's architecture, I'm going to be going over 5 different components that correlate between my Raspberry Pi and my project that I ended up doing using MotionEye with cloud storage. These 5 components are going to be the CPU, the GPU, RAM or random access memory, I/O controllers, and storage. First up, the CPU. How these connect is that MotionEye uses the CPU for video processing, and not necessarily MotionEye itself, but my web camera. But either way, my CPU is used intensely so that way it can grab that video and upload it to the web server. For GPU, my video is rendered using a GPU, not in the same way as a CPU, but the GPU makes it so it's nice and smooth, and it also connects back to my Raspberry Pi. For RAM, random access memory, this allows multiple things to run at once, such as the video itself, my web server, and all the stuff in between. For I/O controllers, this allows my computer, the Raspberry Pi, to receive signals from peripherals such as my USB camera. Without an I/O controller, my Raspberry Pi wouldn't be able to use my camera. Otherwise, without any I/O controllers, this wouldn't be possible. Then for storage, my Raspberry Pi needs a lot of storage to be able to store the videos. Currently on the Raspberry Pi, it is not using its physical storage and instead is using cloud storage because that is what the project requires. But in the case that I would want physical storage, I could use some physical storage media, so that way I could be able to capture the videos with MotionEye and then be able to store it on a physical device, so that way I could send it somewhere else instead of needing cloud storage. So to recap, my Raspberry Pi uses the CPU, GPU, RAM, I/O controllers, and storage, and this all connects back to my project, which uses each one of these in different ways, but in ways that are pretty basic, but still are very important to both the project itself and how a Raspberry Pi itself works. I followed the procedures from the GitHub repository under the MotionEye project, MotionEye dev install, which had me run through a bunch of stuff, such as installing Python 3.7, which how I did that was use sudo apt update, sudo apt install, which was really easy. Then I installed the Python packet manager, which as you can see is this code. And then I also installed MotionEye, which used more sudo, as you can see on the screen now. This is MotionEye. As you can see, it is up and running, but for some reason is not working. Ignore this, normally it works, but as of right now, where is it? The storage does not work to a cloud storage system. I have tried to get ArcClone to work, but so far it has not worked whatsoever. But I did get MotionEye itself to work. Ignore the camera, it normally works, it's just acting up right now. Some problems that I came into that I didn't need to troubleshoot were, first off, when I was first installing the Python, it did not work when I ran this code, and the problem was that I did not run the entirety of the code that I should have. As you can see here, this is the code that I should have ran, so I had to go back and just rerun this so that way it did work. And then I came into another problem when starting Motion Eye. What I ended up doing was using the URL and trying to run that as code, which it is not. I don't know what went through my head there. But to fix this, I ended up just putting that URL into my web browser, and then that worked. And now, the big problem. The Motion Eye is abandonware, which means that the developers just abandoned the project and haven't updated it since about 2021. The problem with that is that Google Drive has updated since then and has strict requirements for other programs to get authentication keys, which here in this project, what that means is that it does not allow native cloud storage. So to get around that, I had to do a lot of troubleshooting, which I did not end up finishing due to the fact that I still do not understand how the program works. ROClone. ROClone was the fix that I've seen used on a few forums, because this would be another way to send files from my Raspberry Pi to Google Drive, just in a roundabout way. I ended up following this guide here from this GitHub forum post. Back to the guide. It was pretty easy to set up ROClone, as all I needed to do was download it using the same in the same fashion as the code I had used earlier to download Python, which you can see the ROClone code here. Then I got into another problem using ROClone config. I needed to change a parameter, which was use web browser to automatically authenticate ROClone with remote. I had to choose no for this, and then on the same device, my Raspberry Pi, I had to authenticate it or authorize it. But the problem with this is that my Raspberry Pi isn't a headless machine, so I ended up just sending the data from my Raspberry Pi back into the Raspberry Pi, which is a roundabout way, but was the way that I thought would be a little simpler, due to the fact that I would just have to follow this guide, which would in turn make it easier. But that is not the case, because after that I needed to configure an SSH tunnel, which we have done in a previous lab. But the problem with this is that there is no point to doing this, but I went through with this, so I got really lost in this. To add insult to injury, I ended up trying to create a Google API console, which was a really roundabout way to get ROClone to work. But here I ended up following this guide to make my own client ID, and I ended up being able to do this easily enough, which I just had to go through Google's API console with a new Google account, that being the Google account that I was going to use for storage, and I had to create a new project and enable a PIS and services. I had to use credentials, and I basically had to create a new app, and this app was so that I could be able to push my video files from my Pi using rclone into my internal Google Drive storage. This did not end up working, unfortunately, due to rclone not working in the first place. The lessons that I learned from doing this project are that I should look for more help from others, such as friends that have done the same project or similar, and then look deeper online for solutions, because I went more surface level. But I also didn't have the best understanding of rclone, so maybe in the future I should research what I'm using more than I did.